Recording in progress.
Greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm here with Writing for Your Life for a book launch interview with Miriam Cochrane Smith. I'm really delighted to be talking with Miriam about her new book, her first book, Echoes of Eden, excuse me. Miriam, I'd love to just maybe start if you can. You have a really interesting background, and I know you live in Kenya, so maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your background, and then I'd love to hear about your book and how the launch is going.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate, for having me on this Writing for Your Life. And I've been following this, website and the people involved. So it's really a privilege to be here today and to meet you virtually. Yes. So I want to start by just giving kind of the metaphor of this book, because I feel like it kind of embraces also my life and my life story. So the big story of the book is Echoes of Eden, and that's kind of my metaphor for the longings of our hearts. And I guess I've just really felt like living life and being friends with our longing is really important. So I grew up as a child of missionaries who went to Central Africa. They left the United States when I was 2 years old, spent a couple of years in France, and then went to Chad, Southern Chad in Central Africa. And so that's where I spent my childhood, and interacting with other missionaries and lots of people, Chadian people, and went to boarding school in Kenya for high school and traveled back and forth, which was quite a journey every time. And then eventually did university in the United States and studied transformational development and cross-cultural communication, and came back and worked in various NGO type organizations, and also in missionary work, always focused on sustainable development. Since 2019, I've been full-time with my husband with the nonprofit that I'm a co-founder of. My friend from boarding school, whom I met when I was 14, she and I began a nonprofit called Eden Thriving. It's edenthriving.org. You can find it on the web, but we really focus on the next generation of kids, of youth, and trying to address the environmental roots of poverty. And we can maybe talk about why I feel that's important. But this journey of my life took me away from, say, the culture of my parents, the culture of what was supposed to be home for me, which would have been the United States if I had stayed here. And I had the privilege of not growing up in my birth culture. But I think what that did for me is really make a poignant sense of homesickness. Not for America. I was very at home in Africa. I loved my childhood. I always say that I grew up kind of in the era of sort of my great grandmother. So if you ever go to Cracker Barrel and you sit there and look at the stuff on the walls, that's kind of the way I grew up. And I honor my parents, especially my mom, for living in that life in the early 70s and 80s. But I didn't fit in necessarily where I grew up. And there's different stories in the book that kind of bring out how that sense of belonging or loss of belonging, where is home for Miriam? And where do I fit in? And why did that become kind of a deep sort of search in my life, or a yearning to find home? And I think that making peace with those longings became for me kind of a thread, I would say, for many years in my life. And then as I went into my adulthood and came to the place where I could do something with it, it came out, I would say, in founding Eden Thriving, which is the tagline for Eden Thriving is cultivating thriving lives and flourishing landscapes. So connecting the fact that land and lives go together. And I think with Echoes of Eden, what I'm trying to bring out or share with the world is that our inner and outer landscapes also go together, that we have these longings. And a lot of times longings, I would say, are born through loss, a loss of something, longing for beauty. It's so poignant maybe when we see an Easter lily, it's just Easter, and these beautiful flowers or a sunset. And in some ways it's like something grabs us and we're like, wow, I want more. It's that moreness, and maybe realizing that it's hard to find or it's hard to get, or longing for wholeness, longing for beauty, longing for delight. So these are kind of the longings around which this book is framed. And I think it really is reflective of probably the longings around which a lot of my life has been framed.
Well, that's beautiful. And can you just orient the listeners and potential readers to sort of how the book is structured? Because I think it's a really interesting combination of narrative and poetry and photos. So can you just talk a little bit about the structure of the book?
Sure, yeah. I'm calling it a poetic journal. And I think that's because longings are not something that we can just quickly acknowledge and move on. We need to sit with them. And I feel that there's the way the book is structured is that there's little prose kind of introduction slash a few stories of my life, maybe a little memoirish kind of vignettes, which tap into what I was the longing, the way that longing, particular longing, was birthed in my life, or at least one of the ways. And then it gives the reader opportunity to read through some of the poetry that I've written, that I feel like sometimes words just don't do tap into the depth of our longing. And so for me, that has come out in poetry, spiritual poetry or poetry of longing. I don't know if that's if there is such a genre, but I feel like that's what it is. And maybe some of that poetry, as people read through it, will tap into their own sense of longing that maybe has sort of been pushed to the side or not wanted to be seen or looked at. And then there's journal pages, just a few, and of course, just to spark readers' ability to sit with the longing that we're talking about. So the book is framed around 5 major longings, which are kind of the chapters of the book. So longing for wholeness, longing for love, longing for beauty, longing for delight. And we go through those, and yeah, very personal, I would say. It's a very vulnerable kind of book. I've never shared anything like that to a larger audience. I feel like it's almost like peeking into my journal. And yet I think because longings are universal and that it can tap into what somebody else might be feeling, and encourage them to write their own poetry, or the journal pages really specifically invite people to get something from nature or paste an image or paint or, color or do something creative that would really allow them to sit with a little bit of that exquisite pain of longing, and sit in a posture of receptivity.
Well, thank you for that. That's great. And what you're saying reminds me, there was a sentence in the introduction that really jumped out at me, and perhaps this is because I'm getting more in touch with my own longing. But you said something about this whole process requiring courage, the courage to slow down and be still and to listen. And the word courage really jumped at me because I'm in a season of my own life where I'm sort of trying to create space to slow down in those ways. And it's scary because I think sort of staying busy, pushing forward, staying active, going on to the next thing, in some ways, at least for me, that feels more comfortable. And then you just talked about the vulnerability of publishing the book. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk about that idea of courage or bravery, or sort of the fear, some of the fears that can come up around getting in touch with these longings that you're referring to.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely a journey into bravery and courage. I think if your goal is to be courageous and it kind of comes like an ego sort of thing, then you're probably going to miss it. But I like the poem at the beginning of the book, which is kind of the dedication poem, which is take me to the edge of mystery, where daily I plunge into the unknown knowing, that is free from form, definition, and possession. And there's nothing more that takes more courage than that, I believe, for me, because we want to know. I'm like you. I've been in, you and I both have been in nonprofit work, and everything you do in nonprofit work, you back up with a logical framework and with the risk management side and with, the goals and what's going to, and you have to. And this is completely different. And so my mentor at Hayden Institute, where I just finished and graduated as a spiritual director, said a phrase, and in fact, that's who the book is dedicated to, not necessarily him as a person, but anyone who's willing to tap into the luxury and burden of longing for the divine. He used that phrase and it just went straight to my heart, the luxury and burden of longing for the divine. Because if we're willing to tap into that of deepest longings, we will have to have great courage to walk on this path of unknown knowing and surrender, because we want to hold on to our forms, to our definitions. We want to possess what the little bit that we get. I should speak for myself. I get an insight or clarity or something that feels like satisfaction of that longing. And it's like, I just want to grab it. I want to hold on to it. And in a way I do. In a way, that's what this book is about. It's listening to those echoes and following your longing into liberation is kind of the way I say it. But the journey never ends. And I think that's the courageous part, is one foot in front of the other. I find it a beautiful journey. It is deeply uncontrollable. And for those of us who love to have our I's dotted and T's crossed, jumping into that space takes great courage.
Well, that's really a word of encouragement. I am taking notes while you're talking, so I love this, and I love, and it's actually, maybe that's a good segue, because I know you're also thinking about doing some retreats, and I'm curious how you see the book integrating or not to your nonprofit work. Remind us the name of your nonprofit, and I know Eden is both in the title of your book and in your nonprofit, and so do you see the book, which, as you say, is much more of a soul journey, as being interconnected to your nonprofit work, and how so, if so?
Yeah, absolutely. The nonprofit is Eden Thriving. Eden Thriving is our name. So I would say, yes, the metaphor of Eden has been had such strength for me, as a metaphor for home, as a metaphor for satisfaction, for sort of the journey into, say, the promised land. And yet what I've realized over time is that no matter how many Red Seas we cross and how many promised lands we think we've reached, it's just the beginning of another cycle of longing. And that's okay. We're not trying to get the final, boxed in, now I'm here, because then the journey ends. Then the excitement sort of ends. And obviously, hopefully our spiral of journeying towards transformation and freedom and liberation really does keep taking us, so can we say, up and out, but I think it's a journey I'll do until I leave this earth. But as far as how it connects to Eden Thriving, is definitely, the nonprofit runs 5 programs, and you can find those on the website, and every day there's stuff going on. But at the core of what we're trying to do is to cultivate the potential for every life to be a thriving life. Cultivate the potential of any piece of land to be a flourishing landscape. And those two things go together. The thriving, people can't thrive without flourishing landscapes. Landscapes don't flourish unless we have bodies and people ready to help do that. I believe that's kind of the sort of Genesis story, I guess, is that it's so interconnected. And likewise, as we listen to these echoes of Eden in our own soul, that's what I would consider our inner landscape. I don't believe that I can thrive completely as a person and grow into all the essence of who I'm meant to be if I don't attend to that inner landscape. So in the same way, I would almost use the same tagline, but slightly different meanings. For the nonprofit, we're looking more at the external landscapes and the external thriving lives. And there's a spiritual component because, first of all, Africa is very spiritual and honors a lot of the spiritual journeys. So to leave that out, it's also something I realized in nonprofit work that it doesn't make sense to leave out the spiritual. So in our nonprofit work, there's also that call to wonder, worship, wisdom, worship being kind of this idea that our care of the earth is a way of honoring the divine. But in the retreats and in this book and in sort of the inner landscape of our lives also needs to be flourishing. And what does that look like? To me, that means listening to the echoes of Eden in our soul. What does that mean? It means listening to those longings, being willing to sit and make friends with your longing for all those wholeness and beauty and the divine and the mystery. And that way, my flourishing life or my life can also thrive. So I don't know if that can connect it for you. It's almost cultivating thriving lives and flourishing landscapes, kind of on one side being the outward physical, and on the retreat side, on the spiritual soul journey, the inner landscape, and discovering what that is and how we can enjoy our journey through our inner landscape.
I love that. Is just totally makes sense, and it's really a beautiful juxtaposition and complementarity. So thank you. Can you just talk a little bit about the process of writing and publishing the book? As you know, we have emerging authors and aspiring authors who are involved in the Writing for Your Life community. Can you talk? I believe you self-published your book, is that right? And how was that for you? And as a published author myself, I know how vulnerable it is. So, maybe you can just talk about both the sort of logistics of it and sort of the, more inner process as well of publishing your first book.
Sure. Well, during 2020, when COVID hit, our office in Africa and Kenya didn't shut down as long as some of the places in America, but we did shut down for a bit. And so I kind of took that opportunity to go and try and start organizing my thoughts around these longings. And it was kind of have this basement apartment that we keep for guests and friends. And I kind of took it over and had my big flip charts and kind of, pasted them around and started thinking through what is it that's bubbling up in me and what is it that I could try and bring out. And so that's where it started kind of in 2020, although years of journaling and working with the material, I think deep down, but, and again, not really imagining publishing, although I think I wanted to, and people had told me, you're a good writer. You should try and go that route. And then I've been a student at the Hayden Institute based out of Asheville, North Carolina. And so each of us has a final project that we needed to do for their 2-year spiritual direction program. And so I thought, well, let me take the plunge. Let me try and get this done for the final project. I had kind of a deadline. So I thought, this is perfect. I want to do this anyway. And so I reached out to Writing for Your Life, actually to Brian, and he gave me some great leads. And using your website, I found different super helpful resources. I don't know where else I could have gone for all the resources that Writing for Your Life provided in terms of the website. So found an editor who was willing, worked with her to just kind of make sure there were no copy editing mistakes and things like that. And then actually, my neighbor is a publisher, has experience with Kindle Direct Publishing. So I hired him to Blake Aronson to do the layout and design. And originally, I had a lot of photos in there. I really love images. And I find that images just tap into another place in ourselves. And I've learned that a lot through Hayden as well. And I'm such a word person. I'm so didactic and linear. And I'm trying to expand that. And so I realized images were important to me. So I did go ahead and try and put images in, and not as many as I originally had, but it was good. I worked through the process of that and then just with his help, uploaded it, hit publish, and bit my fingernails, I guess.
Well, great. Well, congratulations again on the process, I'm glad you had made and had the time for that. So maybe just to sort of wrap up, if could you tell our listeners where they can find your book and where they can learn more about you and your nonprofit if they're interested? And is there any, maybe we can also just end by sort of what are your hopes for the book? Like what do you hope comes next? What kind of conversations are you having with people and hoping to have with people in this sort of next phase of sharing your words with the world?
Yeah. One of the main reasons that I actually went ahead and published, besides a final project, was that I really want to host some retreats in Kenya. Where I live is just really beautiful on the Malawa River, and an Echoes of Eden retreats. And so part of my goal with this book was that it would be part of the retreating process, that people could have that as a journal throughout. And as we go to different locations and really just sit or go on a walk, there's one of the poems in the book, which is called A Listening Pilgrimage, and just kind of losing our script, losing the map, letting our feet do the listening. And so I use that. I've done a retreat already, but I just didn't have this in print. And so I feel like this will really help us to be able to retreat and tap in. It's a resource for that reason. Obviously, I wouldn't want to limit it just to people coming on retreats, and all are welcome. But it's found on Amazon in Kindle. We do have a Kindle version as well as the hard copy. Obviously, the Kindle's doesn't have the journaling pages, but yeah, I just think I guess I didn't have a huge outcome, like, oh, it has to do this. It just was going to be a resource for retreating. And then, yeah, I think a few people have given me some nice feedback in terms of how it's touched them. And I love spiritual poetry. I read that a lot as part of my life. So I feel like if it can contribute to somebody else's soul journey, and tap into that. As far as I personally don't have a big website. I have always been involved overseas and in the nonprofit world. So EdenThriving.org is out there. I think there's a little bit, I'm on there, but not a big story about me. But I am planning in the next few months to get a website up for the retreats, which will obviously have a little bit more about the book and about my own story. Yeah, so
Well, I'd love to, once the retreats are all, organized, maybe beforehand, we could talk about if there's a way to invite the Writing for Life community to check it out and maybe
yeah.
travel. I would love to go. I've been to Kenya several times, would love to go back and join you if possible. So hopefully, God willing, maybe some folks can travel over to Kenya, and we can broaden the Writing for Your Life community globally, which is one of my hopes. Well, again, I just want to thank you, Miriam, for talking with us and congratulate you on the launch of your book, Echoes of Eden. As Miriam said, you can find this on Amazon in hardback, or excuse me, in print or Kindle. And we really encourage you to check it out. It's a beautiful compilation of both narrative prose, poetry, and photographs. And just thank you again, Miriam, and congratulations. And please let us know how we can continue to support you in this launch. It's really exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. I appreciate the opportunity. And absolutely, just want to say, anyone who did come to Kenya, obviously I'm representing the book, but tons more beautiful people to meet over there who would guide people through really tapping into longings that I've learned so much from my coworkers, Kenyan coworkers, and other African women, especially. So I just want to put that out there, that we're not just talking about Miriam here. I'm a beneficiary of some incredible places and people there in Kenya, and would invite anyone to come. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Blessings, and thank you so much, and look forward to staying in touch and hearing how it goes.
Thank you, Kate. Yep.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.